Ken, I'll leave you to find your own starting point on this story. Let's put us back in the 1860s, more or less. It's a very young city, dirt roads, cattle probably in the streets, horses and carriages and whatnot.
John Harvey Watson, the man in the photograph or the portrait there, is my great-grandfather. And he came to Hamilton in 1854, I think to escape the women in his life. His father, Richard Watson, was the owner at the time of the Upper Canada Gazette. It printed all the government documents, wanted posters, land titles, all that sort of official stuff, what the Queen's printer does today. Richard Watson died in a fire that swept through downtown Toronto. And a line from the reporter, the Globe newspaper of the day, always caught my attention. Richard was the only casualty, and he died, as the writer says, in the performance of a friendly act to a competing newspaper. And he goes on to explain what that was. The fire was sweeping down the street on the Patriot newspaper. John Harvey, for some reason, was out at 2 o'clock in the morning to be part of that event. So what happened? He enlisted the apprentice who was sleeping in the building to remove the trays of lead type that were spread all over the composing room upstairs in the printing office. Now, if you know anything about printing in those days, you know that there would be several different type fonts available at any time, and of course each font had different size letters. There was, 6 point, 8 point, 12 point, whatever. So in the dark, or the reflected light from the fire racing down the street and then burning in the downstairs, because the inks were all, wiped off with kerosene. Jeez. Anyways, John Harvey is running in and out of the door upstairs to get all of the trays of each typeface out to the stairway. The apprentice is running them down the stairs and for safekeeping across the street. The apprentice says, "Mr. Watson, it's time to go." "One more tray," said the reporter. And he went in, and the floor fell in. And of course he went with it. All right, this leaves John Harvey Watson now as the head of the household. He has 2 older sisters, 2 younger ones, and a widowed mother. The 2 older sisters have now been married by 1849. So they're sort of safely looked after. But John Harvey has to step up to look after this family. And I think when John Harvey or Richard Watson was on site and saw the threat to the newspaper, maybe there was an element of chivalry. I'll never be able to prove that. But he died in the performance of a friendly act to a competing newspaper. I think that's a line to live by. All right. John Harvey, his son, now takes over the head of the household, and I think as a young man, he's 22, oh boy, he's got women asking, "Where were you last night? With whom were you? Don't you think you should be?" etc., etc. I think he had enough of that by 1854 to leave town. Why he came to Hamilton, possibly, again, I have to speculate on this, but I think it will stand scrutiny. The owner of a newspaper in Toronto was a very major supporter of the Great Western Railway coming to Hamilton. And I think, well, it's possible, that the newspaper man saw somebody with smarts and accounting experience, and he said, you might think about it. Come to work with me in Toronto, in Hamilton. Great Western Railway is a job you could do. I think that's a feasible connection. Anyways, John Harvey comes to town. And his connection to Auchmar is the day that he joins the 13th Volunteer Militia, and as the lowest ranking officer is called an ensign, and the ensign's job is to look after that flag. You get it out of storage, you see that it's properly placed, you see that it's reverently treated, and you look after that flag. That's the regimental color. Okay, Isaac Buchanan up here has just gotten building. Auchmar is now in place, and I think this is about where Isaac Buchanan decides to set up the 13th Volunteer Militia, and I think the fellows in the back here can correct me on that if I'm wrong. But John Harvey steps into the situation, and he becomes an ensign, and there is a woodcut. The two people on their knees receiving the colors for their companies, Alex Askin is one, John Harvey Watson is the other. They become lifelong friends through the regiment, and they also happen to work, both of them, at the Great Western Railway. Alex Askin is a civil engineer, or at least he becomes a civil engineer during the next 10 years. And so this is dated 1863, this particular woodcut. I think John Harvey liked the job. I think it satisfied his sense of duty, of what was right, and he thrived in it. He rose quickly up to captain by 1865. There are two photographs. Go to the next photo, and that's John Harvey's portrait, I believe. Yep, that's the one back there. And to the next. Terrible photograph, but he's the guy seated in the center, in the front. And the next one, this is in 1864, and the next photo is in 1865, where there's officers and he's parked on the very end. For those of, again, the women are the ones who obviously catch this all the time. They look at his beard and say, well, it's just about the length of yours, you know. Yes, until you get to 1868. This is his wedding photograph. All right? You got to admire that handlebar. You got to admire that beard. Gee whiz. And within the year, his portrait is painted. Noticed he's lost his beard. I think this is the effect of the married life, that he lost it there. John Harvey, during his time in Hamilton, I think also worked or got involved in sailing. And because he was a newspaper guy in Toronto, I think he had connection with people at Fort York. I'm pretty sure the people in Fort York had some knowledge of artillery and probably were the source, I can only guess at that, of where to get starting cannons for starting and stopping sailing races, and how to fire them. Those two cannons that John Harvey Watson bought personally to start and stop sail races are on the table back there for you to look at. Now, his son, there's a sad story after this. John Harvey left Hamilton in 1869. He fought at Ridgeway. The flag that he carried in that earlier woodcut was the one carried into battle at Ridgeway. John Harvey wasn't carrying it in Ridgeway. It would be the job of the ensign, and John Harvey was the captain at that point of his company. And following that, I'm not sure whether he got tarred with the brush that Booker, the commanding officer for the volunteers, got tarred with. I've wondered that many times. Booker was in disgrace for the result of that battle, and I think it might have been one of the factors that led to John Harvey Watson leaving Hamilton in 1869. Another factor, I think, has to do with his buddy, Alex Askin, the engineer, because Alex Askin would have heard about the building and the completion of the first railroad bridge across the Missouri River. The head of steel was going to be on this side of the river, and the town was Council Bluffs, Iowa. And it's a blue-collar town. Omaha, Nebraska is on the other side. But the mile zero was in Council Bluffs. And Council Bluffs became the attraction for John Harvey. He borrowed money from his mother, all his savings. He and Rebecca packed up. He had a railroad pass. He was on his way. He wound up in August of 1869 in Council Bluffs. By January 4th, he was dead, leaving his wife pregnant with a bankrupt business and 3,000 miles from everywhere, everything she knew. That's hard. The body of John Harvey Watson was sent back and now lies in St. James Cathedral Cemetery in Toronto. Rebecca came home and with her son born after his father died. So my grandfather never knew his father. It was a rocky relationship with his stepfather. And that is why the cannons got broken. The kid never learned how to fire them properly. And when he did what he did and fired them, they broke. And I'll point out the problems if you really care. But yeah. I fixed them. So
from that point, Ken, I'm going to throw it open to the floor for a couple of quick questions, and then after, if you wanted to spend a few more moments with Ken, talking over more details, or maybe a little detail on what happened at Ridgeway, who please do follow up with them after.